For more than 400 years, thousands of women lived hidden inside the most powerful empire on earth. They followed strict rules of silence. They gave up their names, their past, and sometimes their future. They were not wives. They were not prisoners. So here's the question no one ever asks. History doesn't even agree on what to call them. Why were these women hidden? And what was the Ottoman Empire afraid the world might see? Imagine standing in the heart of Istanbul 500 years ago. The city is alive. Minarets rise into the sky. Markets overflow with silk, spices, and gold. From Europe to the Middle East, from North Africa to the gates of Vienna, the Ottoman Empire stretches farther than most people can imagine. This is not just an empire of soldiers and sultans. It is an empire of rules, traditions, and secrets. Power here does not only live on battlefields, it lives behind walls, behind curtains, behind doors that never open. To understand why these women were hidden, we first need to understand one simple truth about the Ottoman world. Visibility meant vulnerability. In an empire where power was absolute, being seen could be dangerous, being heard could be fatal. And for women, being known could change the balance of the entire state. The Ottomans ruled through control. Control of land, control of people, control of information. And nowhere was this control more precise, more calculated than in the management of women inside the imperial household. To the outside world, the Ottoman palace looked like a symbol of divine order, but inside it functioned like a carefully engineered machine. Every movement had meaning, every silence had purpose. And hidden deep within this system was a group of women whose lives were designed to be invisible. They were educated, disciplined, watched, and protected, yet never free. History often calls them members of the imperial harem, but that word alone does not tell their story. In fact, it hides it, because the truth is uncomfortable. These women lived under rules that looked eerily similar to religious orders. They followed schedules stricter than many monasteries. They were cut off from men, from family, from the outside world. Some took lifelong vows of obedience, not to God, but to the empire. They did not wear habits. They did not pray in public. But like nuns, they belonged to an institution that demanded silence, sacrifice, and total loyalty. And unlike nuns, they did not choose this life. The Ottoman Empire did not hide these women because it hated them. It hid them because it understood their power. If you search through Ottoman records, you will find thousands of pages describing wars, treaties, taxes, and sultans. But when it comes to these women, something strange happens. The names disappear. Most of them are never mentioned as individuals. No birthdays, no hometowns, no graves marked with stories. They exist as shadows. When historians talk about them, they are described in groups, not as people. Servants, concubines, women of the harem. But those words erase more than they explain, because these women were not all the same. They came from different regions, cultures, and languages. Some were captured during wars. Some were gifted as part of political alliances. Some were born into the system and never knew another life. What connects them is not who they were, but what the empire required them to become: invisible. Unlike queens or noblewomen in Europe, these women were not meant to be remembered. Their power worked only if it stayed unseen. And that's why history treats them differently. Even when one of these women changed the fate of the empire, advising a sultan, shaping policy, influencing succession, her story was often rewritten to make her seem accidental, emotional, or dangerous. because an empire built on male authority could not openly admit that women, hidden behind walls, sometimes held the real influence. So instead, history reduced them to fantasy. Paintings imagined them lounging in luxury. Travelers invented stories of endless pleasure. Poets turned them into symbols, not humans. And the real women disappeared beneath the myth. When most people hear the word harem, they imagine something very specific. Silk cushions, perfume-filled rooms, women waiting for a ruler's attention. This image did not come from the Ottoman Empire. It came from outsiders. European writers and artists, forbidden from entering these spaces, filled the silence with imagination. And fantasy is always louder than truth. In reality, the imperial harem was not a place of constant pleasure. It was an institution, a school, a hierarchy, a controlled female world with rules more detailed than any royal court. Most women inside the harem never saw the sultan. Many never even left their assigned quarters. Days were structured around learning, service, and obedience. This was not a place where desire ruled. This was a place where discipline ruled. Every woman had a rank. Every rank had limits. Every step forward required approval. The goal was not romance. The goal was stability. The Ottoman Empire understood something dangerous. Uncontrolled relationships create unpredictable power. So it designed a system where intimacy was rare, regulated, and strategic. And for most women, intimacy never came at all. They lived lives closer to seclusion than indulgence, closer to silence than celebration. They were watched, not because they were weak, but because they mattered. Because in an empire where bloodlines decided the future, women were never just women. They were potential history. For many of these women, everything changed in a single day. One moment they had a name, a family, a language they grew up speaking. The next moment they crossed a gate they would never leave the same way. The palace walls were not just stone, they were borders between identities. Inside, the rules were clear from the beginning. Your past no longer exists. Your future belongs to the empire. New arrivals were stripped of symbols of their old lives. New names were given, new languages taught, new behaviors enforced. Fear was common, so was silence. But there was also something else, confusion. Because this was not a dungeon. They were fed well, dressed carefully, educated intensely. Kindness and control lived side by side, and that made obedience easier. Because when power does not look cruel, resistance becomes harder. Days followed routines that never changed. Wake, study, serve, wait. Women learned how to walk quietly, how to speak softly, how to lower their eyes at the right moment. Punishments were rarely public. Isolation was enough. To be ignored inside the harem was worse than pain, because attention meant relevance, and relevance meant survival. Some women spent decades inside these walls without ever being chosen, promoted, or released. They aged quietly. Their beauty faded unnoticed. Their skills remained unused. Their lives passed without witnesses. Not because they failed, but because the system required many women and only a few outcomes. Most were never meant to be seen. What most people never realize is this: the Ottoman Empire did not hide ignorant women. It hid educated women. Behind those palace walls, learning was constant. Girls were taught to read and write in multiple languages. They studied Turkish, Persian, Arabic, and sometimes European tongues. They memorized poetry, learned music, history, etiquette, and politics. Not because the empire wanted them to be free thinkers, but because intelligence made them useful. A well-educated woman could manage households, raise princes, understand diplomacy, and advise without ever appearing in public. Education was power, but only if it stayed controlled. Books were selected carefully. Lessons were supervised. Curiosity was encouraged only within boundaries. These women were trained to think, but not to question the system that trained them. And slowly, quietly, something strange happened. Some of them became more informed about the empire than the men who ruled it. They listened behind curtains. They heard conversations meant for no one else. They learned who was rising, who was falling, who was lying, and all of it happened in silence. The harem was not chaos. It was a pyramid. At the bottom were the newest girls, silent, nervous, watched constantly. Above them were servants with limited responsibilities. Higher still were senior women who enforced rules, discipline, and order. And at the top sat women who almost never appeared, but whose words carried weight. Older women trained younger ones. Punishments were often given by women, not men. Authority flowed internally. This system did something brilliant and cruel. It turned women into guardians of the very structure that confined them. Ambition existed, rivalries existed, but they were quiet, because survival depended on being careful, not loud. And every woman knew one truth: only a handful would ever rise, the rest would remain invisible forever. Most stories focus on the rare women who gained power. But most women inside the harem never did. They lived their entire lives inside the same walls. Some entered as teenagers and died as old women without ever stepping outside freely. Some never married. Some never bore children. Some never experienced love. They became caretakers, teachers, supervisors, roles that mattered only inside the system. When they died, there were no public funerals, no written biographies, no statues. Their existence ended the same way it was lived, quietly, and history moved on without them. But a few women learned how to turn invisibility into influence, especially the mothers of princes. In the Ottoman system, a prince's mother held a dangerous kind of power. She could shape his beliefs, guide his decisions, protect him or destroy him. Some women advised future sultans from behind curtains. Some influenced appointments and alliances. Some quietly removed rivals without ever being named. This period later became known as the Sultanate of Women, though even that name hides how subtle their power really was. They did not rule openly. They whispered. And whispers inside a palace could change empires. For most women, love was not romantic. It was risky. Unauthorized relationships were forbidden. Emotional attachment was monitored. Hope itself could become a weakness. Friendships formed quietly. Comfort was shared in glances, not words. Support came in silence. Some women wrote poetry that no one would ever read. Some prayed, not for freedom, but for peace. Because dreaming too much made survival harder. The empire did not need these women to be happy. It needed them to be stable. These women were often compared to religious nuns, but the comparison is incomplete. They did not take vows to God. They took vows to order. Religion existed, But culture and politics shaped the rules far more. Islam did not require women to disappear. Empire did. And that distinction matters, because when outsiders misunderstood the system, they blamed faith instead of power, and the truth was lost again. Disobedience was rare, not because women were weak, but because punishment was invisible. Isolation, removal from duties, erasure. To be forgotten inside the palace was worse than pain, because being remembered meant you still mattered, and forgetting was permanent. Europe never saw this world, so it invented one. Paintings showed fantasy. Books sold desire. The truth, discipline, silence, control, was ignored. And those lies still shape how people imagine Ottoman women today. As the Ottoman Empire weakened, the system collapsed quietly. Some women were released. Some were married off. Some vanished without records. Freedom came, but too late. The world they had known disappeared overnight, and no one asked what they wanted next. Because empires prefer simple stories. Heroes, battles, kings. Hidden women complicate that narrative. They prove power doesn't always wear crowns. Sometimes it whispers from behind walls. These women left no monuments, but they shaped generations. Their silence echoes in history. And maybe that's the most unsettling truth of all. Thousands of women lived unseen in plain sight. They were hidden, not because they were powerless, but because they were not. So ask yourself this: if history could erase them so completely, who else has it chosen to forget?